Hello. Okay, so I am live now. I was going to live stream an hour ago, but I had something that I knew was going to run over, so I tried to adjust it. And I tried to change the title of the announcement video to reflect that. It was going to start an hour later. So I don't know how many of you will still be able to attend, but I hope you guys are doing well. I have been trying to read a little bit more in the past few days because it was technically Easter vacation. And I say technically because this past week I have been mostly just doing a lot of work. It's near the end of the semester, so it can never really be a full vacation for me at this point. But I try to take the last 2 days to read things for myself. And yeah, the book that I'm currently reading is so I have this omnibus edition of the trilogy Les Lames du Cardinal by Pierre Pavel. And this is essentially an alternative 17th century where Cardinal Richelieu is having to fight dragons. Basically, they're these dragons who I think where I am right now is in the first book. My understanding is that essentially there are these spies, or like these Spanish spies who are infiltrating the kingdom and are trying to overthrow the French king, and Cardinal Richelieu is essentially trying to fight them off. So currently he's calling up all of his musketeers to fight for him. And yeah, this is a lot of fun, and it has been translated into English. Hello, William. Let's see how it's been translated. It has been translated as The Cardinal's Blades is the first book, and then The Alchemist in the Shadows is the second book, and then the third one is The Dragon Arcana. So those are the three books. And I do recommend it. I mean, it's like if you like sword fights and duels and capes and like all of that, I think you'll love this. And dragons are they haven't really appeared too much here because you have like what you think of as a dragon, with scales, but then you also have dragons who appear in human form, and like these are the ones that are basically the spies that I'm talking about. And I got this right before the bookstore here in Geneva closed. So that like about a month ago, when the quarantine stuff began, because I was like, oh, I should, get this because I'd been eyeing it and I didn't know if I'd wanted it. But then this edition was like essentially $15. And I was like, okay, for 3 books, that's pretty cool. So that's like the fun thing I've been reading. Then I am currently reading a book that actually just came out, and it's called The Address Book. It's called The Address Book: What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power. And it's written by Deirdre Mask. And it's a book that I got from NetGalley for review. And it is really, really interesting. It talks about addresses, where addresses come from, like addresses in different countries, how they were established, why they're different depending on the country. Talks about people who don't have addresses, and how, what happens when people living in the slums of India don't have an address. What services do they miss out on? But also, why might some people not want to have addresses? So she starts the book by talking about people who live in West Virginia, who live in these really rural parts of West Virginia and don't want to have street addresses. And so this book like deals with the question of, something that we take for granted, street addresses, and explores them from political, religious, social, socioeconomic angles. Super interesting. And I didn't realize that the way that addresses work in the United States really began with William Penn, and sort of the very classical American grid structure began in Philadelphia. Greetings, Justin. Hope you guys are all doing well. I'm just talking about the books I'm currently reading. Feel free to share the books that you guys are reading. I know that the Reading Rush has had like a read along or 4-day reading challenge. I guess in some ways I was participating. I mean, not officially, but any excuse to read more is always great. But yeah, so the address book, I'm going to be making a video about it because, well, I have to review it, but also it is really interesting. And it got me thinking about other organization systems, even like library organization systems, and why we have the organization systems we do, and just libraries around the world. Okay, so William is doing well. I'm reading True Believer by Eric Hoffer at the moment. What is that? True Believer. Never heard of it. I'm gonna go on Goodreads and like look these books up. I don't think I've heard of this one. True Believer. Thoughts on the nature of mass movements. Oh, interesting. Very interesting guy. Yeah, it seems so. So he's this. So Eric Hoffer, he lived in the 1940s and he wrote philosophical treatises. And President Eisenhower cited this book. Very interesting. Okay, yeah. Hello, Titch. We are talking about current reads and what books we've been reading. So feel free to share what book you've been reading, if you have been reading things. I know that some people have felt during this like chronotide, I've heard it called, have had difficulties, well, maybe finding time to read, because a lot of people have a lot more responsibility now that their children are home, or just not feeling like reading, preferring to watch Netflix or whatever. But I do know there was a readathon recently, and I thought we could talk about what we're reading. But this Eric Hoffer sounds really interesting. I'm gonna add it to my TBR. The reviews look really good. So it deals with mass movements and political upheavals. That's what I'm seeing. Very interesting. Super cool. You are reading Black Friday. Oh, it's called The Address Book. Okay, it's called The Address Book, and the author is Deirdre Mask. Her last name is Mask, M-A-S-K. Her first name is Deirdre, D-E-I-R-D-R-E. It's called The Address Book, What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power. It just came out. It came out on April 14th, so I do need to get the review out soon. But it's a really fast read. I mean, and incredibly engaging. Definitely recommend it. And it was really cool to see. There was like discussion about Geneva and how people in Geneva, like in the 17th century, were opposed to street names because they felt like it was going to be this another form of like clericalism, or being able to control people, because once you know where everybody lives, then you can monitor them. And so, there's that. In Paris right now, I mean, actually, about a month and a half ago, I was in Paris, and most of the streets in Paris are named after famous Parisian or French men. Nice idea, avoiding street names. Yeah, I mean, this is what goes on in certain parts of the rural U.S. The author talks about people living in certain parts of West Virginia who don't want street names, because, for example, for precisely that reason, they don't want the government to be able to track them. They don't want, But one of the problems is, though, is when someone is like dying, like the ambulance can't find them because they don't have like street addresses. They have to be like, oh, you have to turn right here and turn left there, and it becomes harder. It becomes harder also for people like in the slums of India who don't have street addresses to get any kind of services, to get any kind of help. So it's like this. It's interesting to see, why people would want addresses, why people wouldn't, and also how addresses are constructed, because they are constructed differently depending on the country, and they serve different purposes. But anyway, in Paris, you have these street addresses that are named after famous French politicians, writers, whatever. But they're all mostly men, like almost like over 90% of the addresses of the street names are of men. So I saw people were like writing in like the names of famous female French women, right? On top of the names of the men. So I did see that in the author of this book, the address book actually mentions it. Problem because in those kinds of communities, everyone helps the other. Yeah, well, that is exactly the argument that these people in West Virginia were making, was that, oh, we don't need other people to help us because we'll just help each other. And yeah, it was a really interesting argument. Let's see. Justin, Problems in European Civilization, volume, The Greatness of Louis XIV, Myth or Reality? Oh, wow. Okay. Myth or reality? I feel, well, for me, it's always myth, because Louis XIV was a tyrant, and yeah. But I want to look that up. I've been reading books on American history. So I just finished reading, look this up. I just finished reading Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick, who is a popular historian who writes about, I'm going to go look at this book, but he writes about American history, okay? And I'd read his book, Into the Heart of the Sea, which is about the whale ship Essex and the tragedy of the Essex ship in the 19th century, which inspired Moby Dick, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And then I'd read Away Offshore, which is about Nantucket and the Quakers in Nantucket and the whaling industry. So I decided, because I really want to brush up on my American history, I feel like that's a huge hole in my knowledge. Obviously, as an American, I learned American history in school, but I basically just slept through the entire class. I mean, I did take the test, but I didn't really pay attention. And it's something that I really regret. So it's something I'm trying to fix. And so I finished reading Nathaniel Philbrick's book, Mayflower, because it's like probably the place to start. He did write about the massacre of the Indians. So he writes about Prince Philip's War, is what, King Philip's War? Forget the nickname, but basically Philip was the son of Massasoit, who was the sachem of the Poconokeets, which today are the Wampanoag. And he basically went to war because 4 of the Indians were executed by the Puritans. And hello, everybody. And yeah, so basically he wanted he wanted revenge. And it's just much of the book Mayflower is actually about this war, which was very pivotal in changing the relationship between the separatists, the Puritans, and the Indians. And I guess that's why some people say it's boring. But I actually found it very interesting and very well written, about just how tragic it is. How tragic it is that at certain points there seem to be attempts at alliance, and but then everything just fell apart because of people's egos, because of people's just desire for land. But it also, I think, what I liked about Nathaniel Philbrick's book is that it shows also these sachems. I think that's how it's pronounced. The leaders of these tribes having their own personal political goals, and how the Puritans and the separatists could further their own political goals. I thought that was very, very interesting, and showing also the conflicts that existed between different tribes, how those conflicts existed before the separatists arrived, and then once they did arrive, how that changed. So I thought it was really interesting. I really want to continue on with Philbrick's books. He has a whole, I think, trilogy on the Americans. So I think I'm going to go do that next. So yeah, I'm trying to brush up on my American history. But of course, French history is maybe more immediately important for me, since I work in French history. And I've never heard of this author. So Problems in European Civilization. Let's see, what was it? Problems in European Civilization, The Greatness of Louis XIV. Let's see. So is that William Ford Church? Is that it? Myth or Reality? Yeah. Okay. So it's by William Ford Church. Interesting. Somebody wrote in Goodreads, leaves you wondering what was so great about Louis XIV. I mean, French history is full of blood. Yes, it is. There is a lot of blood. And honestly, people talk about like the dark Middle Ages. I work on the 16th century, aka the Renaissance, and I have not seen. It's just blood everywhere. It's blood everywhere. I don't know what people are talking about the enlightened Renaissance, because there were so many massacres and executions, and it was just really messy. And then, Louis XIV was a tyrant who caused the death of thousands of Huguenots, and he was just he was the absolute monarch, right? Like, I mean, I don't know, but there is this kind of very there's this myth surrounding the Louis XIV, and also Napoleon, as these really great men. And that was their propaganda, how they present themselves. So yeah, this sounds super interesting. A bit old. It's published in 1959. Doesn't have too many reviews, but yeah. Algeria, millions were killed. Right, exactly. The Algerian War. Justin says, I see the family village clans of mountain folk being very strong to a fault sometimes. Yeah, there is this show that I was watching, and I think it's called Mountain Men, and it basically follows, is it I think there's 3 mountain men. It's basically the 3 frontiersmen living in North America. 1 lives in Canada, and like 2 live in the United States. And one of the people they follow, his name is Eustace, and he lives in North Carolina, I think. And he's basically like that. He's like, no, the government is out to get me. I'm off grid. I hate the government. I will not have them come and help me in any way. And he actually basically refuses to pay taxes on his land. He has a lot of land because he's like, no, they're going to have to pry this land from my cold, dead hands. I'm going to be, if they come there to try to collect taxes, I'm going to, I'll be there with my shotgun. And, I'm just like, whoa, okay. That's extreme, but it's also kind of part of the American legacy, like the frontiersman Daniel Boone kind of thing. And that is a reason why, I guess some people don't want to be able to be traced. But then I think, on the other extreme, I think about social media, for example. And obviously I'm on social media, and obviously I'm perfectly fine with it. But I think about how trusting we are of, these social media accounts, like Facebook. I remember, like, this is definitely not related to history, but whatever. I remember when I'm a millennial, so Facebook and Twitter are more of the kind of social media I use. And I don't even know how to use Snapchat or TikTok or any of those. When I first got Facebook, there was always this fear of like being friended by some creep who wants to, and we were always told, oh, don't give out your information. Don't give out your information because some, creepy person could kidnap you. And, never thought about how joining Facebook, like how my data would be used by Facebook. Like there was never any kind of discussion about how when we create these accounts, how the data is sold by these companies and used by these companies. And, how many non-Facebook sites do I log into through Facebook? So we, I think, are we can really be traced today. And I think that maybe, what I did find, started thinking about when I was reading the address book was about other addresses and how we can be traced online similarly to how we can be traced in real life, like not virtually. And I think that's interesting. Kenyon, hello. Parallels between American history and French history. I'm reading Napoleon by Andrew Robertson, struck by the amount of chaos and suffering in French history. Oh yeah. Yes. Napoleon by Andrew Roberts. Ooh, that sounds good. Is that the huge book on Napoleon that yes, that is the Napoleon Alive I've been seeing around. Looks excellent. It is a 926 page biography of Napoleon. It has good reviews. It has very good reviews, which we would hope so with 926 pages. Yeah, that is the big one I've seen around. Yes, French history. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of blood, and not just the French Revolution. I mean, it's not so pleasant because continental law, for example, executed people for, there was executed people for heresy. Okay, so there was, you'll see lots of executions because heresy was considered treason. Basically, you're denying the king's religion, and France was the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church. It was like, so basically, if you weren't an Orthodox Catholic, you were, well, it depends. I mean, if you had a lot of influence, you were really in trouble, and you would be delivered over to the state, and the state would execute you for treason. Okay, William, so you've been saying being traced and held to account. That's the real danger. A friend wants me to get Facebook. I told him that I don't want to have my relatives tracking me down. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. My relatives, they're on Facebook, but like my mom doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. Like she's technophobic, which is unique. But I wonder about Facebook being able to track us down. I am, and this, of course, gets to other ways of tracking people down for when they behave badly and then they get doxxed and dragged on Twitter, and how that affects their careers, cancel culture, basically. And that's a whole conversation. That's a whole conversation. I don't know if, you know, if I want to talk about that now. Um, Facebook can activate your microphone. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, cancel culture. That comes to mind too, because I think, okay, what have I put out in the past that I could be traced to, and then, like, what would that mean? Um, High jump guru. Wow. Do you jump really high? Are you gonna be able to teach us how to jump high? That's a great name. I recently read How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. It's a great read with a great plot and it's very touching. With a plot. So it's a novel. Cool. Okay. TBR grows every day. Oh, it's by Mohsen Hamid, who wrote Exit West. I didn't read Exit West, but it's man's journey from impoverished rural boy to corporate tycoon. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, Justin says, speaking of pioneering folk, they arrived with serious bloodlust against nature and indigenous people. Yeah, I mean, when they did arrive, at least with the separatists, because the separatists, they're like essentially religious fundamentalists who arrive for their own religious purposes. They then discover that, well, there are other people living there. And because they're not all, they're not there to conquer territory per se. I mean, they are, but they come with like their wives and their children and such. In the beginning, they are interested in living peacefully with the indigenous people, but that begins to change once they realize that, well, if we just push these people off the land, we could just take their land, and creating, and then start, and racism really begins where people start, thinking about Indians in this racist sort of way. And then they start to kind of profit from the tensions that already existed in the region between tribes. And, just within like 50 years of the Mayflower landing, I mean, things have changed so dramatically. So yeah, it's not exactly clear that they arrived with bloodlust against indigenous people. It's more that developed. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because you have these like praying Indians, as they're called, which are Indians. My understanding, they're Indians who converted to Christianity, and they start to become, they'll basically work for the Puritans and the separatists against their enemies. So they'll basically are like Indians betraying other Indians in the service of the white settlers. And it's really disturbing, but also, I think, very much what goes on in other parts of the world. I mean, when you think about what has happened to the continent of Africa in the aftermath, well, because of colonization, and now the aftermath of colonization being what it is a similar dynamic. Did they think the native people were not fully human? I don't think so, not at the time. I mean, that's not what Nathaniel Philbrick suggests. I think they definitely thought that they weren't Christian. So for people who were like, the separatists would be, well, not only not Christian, because separatists had this particular vision of Christianity, and if you didn't follow it, then you were like lost. You weren't saved. So that would definitely include the native people. But yeah, the racism really develops. It's not something that the people arrive with. It's something that develops for several reasons. Until eventually, they're not seen as fully human at all. They're sold into slavery. Before the Africans are sold into slavery, they were enslaving Indians. Tribalism clans. Yes, yeah. I mean, that's what's going on. One of the most interesting parts of Mayflower talks about what's his name? Squanto. And I remember when I was a child, I read a book on Squanto. I was like 6. I was supposed to have read the book on Squanto. Actually, I didn't, and then I failed the book report. But anyway, Squanto was always seen as like the friend to the settlers. But he had his own political reasons for doing so. He basically wanted Massasoit's position. He wanted to, he had his own political reasons for doing so. And, I thought that was interesting. Again, it gives agency to the indigenous people instead of saying, oh, well, like, here's this really friendly Indian. He was really nice to the white man. It's like, why? Like, what's going on, in the name of European Christian values, yes, Dahomey was whole hog middleman in the world of African slavery. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that studying this kind of history is so important for understanding politics today, not just in my own country, but around the world. So yeah, I'm trying to really get into reading histories more. I do like histories, but I often just focus on the very narrow field that I work on, and I want to get a more broader knowledge of history. And of course, you always lose something by reading general histories, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having, I don't want to say a superficial knowledge of history, but at least a very general kind of basic knowledge of events, because I think that that's better than not having the knowledge at all. Let's see. Anything else you guys have been reading? I have been reading Zola's Nana. It's one of the books I have to read for my PhD exam. It's good. It's very dense. Hello, Lukash. It's dense. It's basically about this woman named Nana who is a burlesque dancer, and she basically in the story, Zola basically exposes high society in France and how all these people are pretending that they're scandalized by Nana, but actually they're basically attracted to her. And especially there's this one count, Mufa, who is stalking her and just really creepy, even while he's appalled. He's appalled that this woman would do what she does. You're reading for the BookTube prize. Oh, how is that going? Is this for the octafinal or whatever they call it, where it's not the quarterfinal, but it's before that? Is that what you're doing right now, Lukash? Okay. So I can't talk about what I think of anything, right? Everyone seems to be reading The Plague nowadays, except me. I need to do that. I want to read The Plague, and I also want to read what is the one that's like about a traveling circus and the Spanish flu or something that like kills off the entire society? That one too I want to read. Okay, it's for the octafinals. Okay, let's go back a little bit. Kenyon says, I'm just getting into French literature. What is your hierarchy of French writers? Balzac at the top. Oh, well, for me, my favorite French writer is definitely Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, because I read The Little Prince when I was, starting out in French, and I was obsessed, and I still think it's incredible. But I also really love his autobiographies. I would say Balzac is great because he has so many novels, and he's like, in one novel, you'll have a main character who will then be a side character in another novel. So Balzac is great. Who else would I recommend? Honestly, when I think about it, I haven't been too dedicated to too many authors reading several works by them. I really do love Molière. I do have to say I'm having a read-along of 5 of Molière's plays in May. So if you want to get into a great French author, Molière is huge. He's like the Shakespeare of French literature, and he mostly wrote comedies. So it's kind of a change from Shakespeare mostly writing tragedies. With Balzac, I would definitely recommend. I would start with Father Goriot. I would say Father Goriot, Père Goriot is a good one to start with. Okay, Lukash says, I'd say it's going well. I'm enjoying it more than I feared. Well, that's good, because I've been seeing a lot of not so positive reviews in these octafinals anyway. Justin says, Fenimore Cooper is very sympathetic about the plight of the First Nations people. Okay, yeah. Last of the Mohicans, right? Fenimore Cooper. And Titch says, check out Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Yeah, I mean, there you go. Les Mis, right? That's a classic. And then you can watch I really liked, I only saw like the first hour and a half, but the most recent film adaptation of Les Mis I really liked. What I was watching anyway. I'm having to read Notre Dame de Paris soon, so I'm excited about that one too, just because the only version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame I know is the Disney one, and Disney, when I say takes liberties, I mean, that's an understatement. Disney like completely rewrites the story, so I'm interested in seeing what's different about it. But yeah, Kenya, that's a good suggestion. Les Miserables is good. You could read Candide by Voltaire. Voltaire's satires are pretty funny. Oh, yes. Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand is amazing. And my favorite adaptation, this is my personal film adaptation. I just saw it recently. I checked it out from the library. It is I can't find it. Let's see. Find it, because I saw it and I loved it. And I can't find it right now. Is it The Great Performances? Oh, that's what it is. Okay, so there's a Great Performances episode on Cyrano de Bergerac, and that is actually one I saw years ago. It's in English, and I saw it before I was ever introduced to the play, and I found it riveting. And then in French, I just saw it recently, and I don't remember which one it is. Oh, it's this one. It's the Comédie Française version. Pretty sure it's the Comédie Française version. Let's see. Yeah, it's the Comédie Française version. That is my favorite French version that I have seen. I loved it. But yes. Or the Yes, I would. So what I would recommend is definitely getting a translation by someone who has a professor, of French literature. I would recommend that. But I think that another book I recommend is The Great Estate. It's called The Great Estate. Okay, let's talk about French literature. All right. So favorite piece of French literature nowadays. Okay, I don't read as much modern French literature, but I read a book by Mélisse de Kerangal, which is called Réparer les vivants, which is translated as Repair the Living. So her name is Mélisse, Maylis, de Kerangal, which is Kerangal, I think it is. And her book, Repair the Living, is about a boy who dies, but they keep him basically, they don't keep him alive, but he's basically on a machine so that they can keep his heart beating. And then it's all about a heart transplant, basically. Okay, it's a novel about a heart transplant, and it's amazing. The Sirens of Baghdad. Ooh, I've never heard of that. I will look at that. But yeah, another French novel. This one's older. This one's not very recent, but I do recommend The Great Estate by Alain Fournier. The Great Estate is basically YA. I mean, that's what it would be considered today. It's young adult. It is coming of age of two boys in a boarding school, and I love that book. I think it is so atmospheric. There are scenes in this castle that are just amazing, and I really recommend that. Let's see. Other books. I don't really have other books. Hello, L'Île Uzi Vert. That's a cool name. The Sirens of Baghdad. What is that? Have you read much Gide? So I've read 2 books by Gide. I've read La Symphonie Pastorale, which I've read several times. It is one of my favorite French works. And Pastoral in English. Uncomfortable. And he's, presented as being, someone who had gay characters in his books. But Les Moralistes is really about a pedophile. I mean, because the whole time you have this grown man who's talking about his attraction to boys. So, or at least pederasty. It's uncomfortable. Gide makes me a bit uncomfortable in Les Moralistes, but I loved La Symphonie Pastorale, and I really would love to read other things by Gide. It was also made into a film. It's like an old film, and I really liked that. Another French work I loved, it's more spiritual, but it's Diary of a Country Priest by Georges Bernanos. Really love that book. Let's see, I can go to my Goodreads because I read a lot of French works and I don't always remember which ones I've read. I was going to also look up The Sirens of Baghdad. By Yasmina Khadra. Never heard of it. Interesting. Oh, wow. This deals with Islamic fundamentalism. Oh, wow. Okay. Sounds really interesting. So books I have read. Gide was a proud pederast, which has kept me away, but I'm wondering if I'm missing out on something of literary importance by doing so. So I think that Gide also wrote Les Faux Monnayeurs, right? I don't know how Les Faux Monnayeurs is translated, but I really liked that one. There is a little bit, it's called The Counterfeiters. That's how it's translated by André Gide. I read that one as well. So I've read 3 of Gide, and I did like Les Faux Monnayeurs. I remember there being a little bit of that, again, pederasty element, but it's quite good. I think that he's worth reading, especially The Counterfeiters, just because it is an early experimental work. And I do recommend this Pastoral Symphony. And I think for the most part, I mean, even though it's dealing with illicit love, it's not as it's not as problematic, I would think. A little bit, but yeah. Let's see. He makes me uncomfortable too, even though there's a lot of pederasts in the history of literature. Yeah, so this is something that I've actually noticed. When it comes to French literature, there'll be a lot of talk about how André Gide or, whatever were early queer writers, and it's like, it's not so clear. It's not so clear. I don't know if this is sort of I don't know. It's when it's at a time when people were in the closet, so it's not clear. I know that at one time, Jean-Paul Sartre, along with some other people, tried to legalize pedophilia. So it's disturbing. It's disturbing. Can we separate the art from the artist? Well, okay. Let me go back a little bit, because that's a big question. I want to think about that more. What about Australian literature? I'm currently writing my dissertation on Peter Carey's works. Would like to know your opinions. I don't actually know Australian literature. Is Hannah Kent Australian? Because I think she's Australian. So I read Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, and I loved it. That's the only Australian writer I know. You love belles lettres, and we non-speakers are blessed to peek into your world. Thanks. Oh, well, no problem. I'm constantly learning from in the English-speaking world, I feel. Can we... Oh, hello. Someone from Lijinga? Lijinga. You'll have to tell me how to pronounce that. Can we separate the art from the artist? So Roland Barthes was this semiotician in the 20th century who argued that for the death of the author, saying that when we read a work, we need to realize that we need to not read the author into the work. Okay, so his whole thing was about the death of the author. And yeah, just like Lukács says here, it's easier if the person is long dead. It's easier because you don't feel like you're giving money to that author. And then I can read the work for other reasons than just personal pleasure. I can read it for historical reasons, like, oh, this book was written at this point, and so it tells me something about the time period, etc. I think when it's an author who, especially today, again, going along with the social media thing, when you have someone like J.K. Rowling who keeps shooting herself in the foot, she's very present online. She's very much public. And on top of that, she's telling us how to read her books. So then it becomes really hard to separate the author from the work, because actually the author wants us to not separate the author from the work. And I think social media has really blurred those lines. But not only social media. I mean, I think always, in some ways, the author was implicated in their work. Literary critics, at least in academia, certainly are concerned about the author. But ultimately, a book can be not. A book can be ugly and problematic and still be valuable. But about books today, I don't know. I mean, for example, Orson Scott Card is like this author on BookTube that is always mentioned as like being homophobic. And, he did write Ender's Game. I've considered reading Ender's Game, but then I think, do I want to read his book? Like, do I want to support what he stands for? And the answer is, well, no, I don't want to support that. It becomes hard, or authors who have, sexually abused people. Okay, so I don't want to be supporting them, but then maybe they did write something that's actually good, and it becomes hard. Oh my god, the Marquis de Sade. Oh no. That. Okay, let me go back before Marquis de Sade. All I'm going to say, Justin, about Marquis de Sade is Marquis de Sade is another example of how there's like, I don't know how to put it. Marquis de Sade was an abuser, okay? He raped women, okay? I know we use the term sadism as this part of the BDSM, all that. Marquis de Sade was actually a horrible human being who abused people and was a monster. And yet he is still cited as a libertine, somebody who was sexually free. And it's like, when your sexual freedom impinges on the sexual freedom of other people, that's abuse. So I wouldn't recommend Marquis de Sade. If you want sexual freedom, I would recommend Dangerous Liaisons by Charterhouse de Parma. I just finished it recently. I'll be making a video about it. That one is also about abuse of power, but at least the author, at least from what I know, isn't the one doing the abuse. And in a way, the way that it's presented, while it's funny, I think it's a way that predators enter into the lives of their victims. Really good. That one's one I would recommend. I wouldn't describe Dostoevsky as a degenerate. He had a gambling addiction, made some bad choices, but by all accounts was someone of probity and profound moral convictions. Yeah, I don't know too much about Dostoevsky as a person. I started Brothers Karamazov and didn't continue for some reason, but I did read one of them, Notes from an Underground. I read that one for a booktubeathon years ago. Dostoevsky seems really interesting. Well, for me, in some weird way, literature is distinctive. And art includes painting. Let's see what do you say? Art includes painting, poetry, and a lot of beautiful stuff. The artist definitely brings something on the table of their own personality, but every art is a unique creation. So are you suggesting that that literature is not art? Or are you saying the literature is art, and then therefore the artist is always bringing something to themselves into their work? I mean, yeah, I think that especially in light of, yeah, I find it very hard to think that anybody cannot put themselves into their work, to some degree. Let's go back here. This is the first time I've had comments I have to catch up with reading. This is really great. I'm very touched. I think people are capable of terrible things. This doesn't take away from their literature to me. When someone is truly an evil person, though, then that malevolence can't help seep into the text. Yeah, I definitely get that. And also, when you know something about an author, you try to find it in their work because you expect that it will be there in their work. It's hard for literary critics. Like, I don't think I could ever really be a literary critic, like a true, New York Times critic, or New York Review of Books or whatever. Not only because I would never be chosen, but to do that, you have to be able to. Oh, 1 second. Connection's unstable. Okay, I'm back. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm not usually someone who's, tremendously concerned about, people making mistakes in their past. Like, for example, I'm willing to forgive people who've made mistakes in the past and apologize. Like, that's just how it is. Um, I'm not terribly involved in that, but usually it's in cases of abuse when I'm like, if they're modern authors, if they're older authors, I mean, I'm on massacres and executions, so I mean, look, I'm not exactly reading the most righteous people. And I think that sometimes, honestly, I'll be honest, there have been spiritual works that I've read that I found very powerful and moving, and their writers to be quite problematic. And I don't find their writings any less moving. I don't know too much about Dostoevsky's life myself. I've heard there is some bad stuff in there. Marquis de Sade is one I would explore. I wouldn't. I've heard there is some extremely, extremely disturbing things in there, and Marquis de Sade was like a horrible abuser, and like, look, you read it and let me know. But why so much debauchery and perversion among French artists? It's sort of strange. Is it cultural in some way? Well, okay, so there's a lot of ways of answering this. The first is that the French do have a more open sexual standards. So things like polyamory has been like in French culture forever. But as far as like perversions and such, I think it's part of this anti-clericalism too, where it's like, sometimes in wanting to reject a certain authoritarianism, there isn't this way of this reflection over like the limits of that. So maybe that's it, It's like people like Gide can maybe fall through the cracks because it's like, oh, he's rejecting like this heteronormative society and not think, this attraction to teenagers is a little bit sketch. Like there's something wrong here. This isn't sexuality. This is a perversion. But there wasn't really also a lot of, people were in the closet again. So there's a lot. That's why it's so hard to talk about this, because it's like, how do you classify someone's sexuality? I mean, I don't know. Let's see. Art also includes war. Crime and Punishment is everything you'd expect. It's great. I'll read it. I'm reading Stendhal's Red and the Black. Oh, I love. Okay, Le Rouge et le Noir was my favorite book of 2019. Was it 2019? Yes. No, 2018. My favorite book of the year that I read was Le Rouge et le Noir, and I love the book so much. I found the character Julien Sorel to be so compelling, and I really saw myself in him. And obviously, that doesn't say a lot about this says something about me. I guess I want to say that I feel like his warring passions is something that I could relate to, and I just found him to be such an interesting character, not entirely likable, but I really loved it. And I have a novella by Stendhal that I want to get to. And then, of course, there's the Charterhouse of Parma, which I haven't read yet. Brothling was clearly some men indulged in, especially with slaves. Yeah. I mean, that's yeah, I think it's a mixture of things. I think it's connection is unstable. Yeah, I think it's a mixture of things. It's, trying to rebel against standards and not really reflecting on like what we're embracing in the process of rebelling against something. And then it's different standards. I think there was a time in French history among the aristocrats. It'll be quite clear here. It's not the most of French society, where it was like, we don't want to be part of this structure of like the church's understanding of relationships. And so there was a lot of experimentation, some of which was consensual and some of it was probably not. Ken Wilbert's integral map is a good way of understanding when people operate at different levels in different areas of their lives. Ken Wilbur, is his name? Wilbur. Looking into him. Interesting. Well, it has been an hour. And it is midnight in my world. I don't know what time it is in your world. I think it's probably like 6. In the Eastern, it would be Eastern Standard would be 6. And then like 3 or 2 for Pacific. But yes, any 11 p.m. in the UK. Okay, so UK is 1 hour behind. Okay. So yeah, any parting words, parting words, yes. Last words for the week. I really love this. I did not expect this chat to go so well, because yesterday I was like, oh, what will I talk about today? Like, what will my live stream idea be? But I thought I'd just start with what I'm reading. And honestly, I really like this way. Oh, thank you for, it's so sweet. Thank you, Kenyon. That's wonderful. Yeah, so I'm trying to do this every Sunday, and I really love talking to you all. And I think, I'll just start with what I'm reading, and then you guys can share what you guys are reading. And that makes me really happy that this went so well. So thank you very much. And last little thing, I have a good read on for Molière May. So if any of you guys wants to get into French literature, we're going to be reading 5 of Molière's plays in May, and I made a video talking about Molière and with the Goodreads group linked below, so you can check that out if that interests you, and we'll be talking about it in English or French, whichever language you want. Parting words, just keep safe and healthy, everyone. Yes, keep safe and healthy. Social distance if you can. I mean, I know there are people working in medical care, and you guys are great, and thank you for all you do. And for the rest of us, we should stay home and try not to eat all the chocolate. I'm reading the Symposium, wonder why love is being associated with reproduction. Ooh, I made a video on Plato's Symposium. It is actually my most viewed video, so perhaps you will find it valuable. It is my most popular. Been helpful is think people have watched it to prepare for exams or something. Why is love being associated with reproduction? Oh, Plato Vid is how you found me. Okay, there you go. So you could watch that video. I'll just say that for Socrates, love is not associated with reproduction. So keep going on the Symposium and you'll see how it turns out. Okay. Stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Hopefully make a video before that.